You're getting nervous, man. Why?
And we're live.
Hello.
Yes, emoji. I got it wrong.
Yeah. Hello. Welcome back to Out of the Darkness. I am your host, Q, and we have a fantastic show set up for you guys. Sorry about that. We had a slight gaffe, I guess you would say. But hey, leave it to us to boomer it up. We're going to have such a fantastic show. By the time it's all said and done, you will 100% forget about the gaffe in the opening. That was my oversight and slightly Soder's oversight. But it doesn't even matter because we have the one and only James Williams. How you doing, Dr. Jim?
I'm doing great, Q. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, man. Oh, it's always cool to see you. And I know a lot of the guys have been messaging, asking when we're going to get a chance to have you back. And so we appreciate it. It's a lot has changed, man. A whole lot has changed. This ever changing, world that we live in. I'm not going to lie to you, man. I've actually been a little bit frustrated. So I was out in town earlier today and I watched this little girl. She was 6. And her grandmother says, "Hey, do you have your masks?" "Of course I do. We're going shopping." And they get out of the car and she throws her mask on. And for a minute, there was something in my heart, man, that was just like, is this the new world we live in? Like, is that where we're at? I mean, a 6-year-old should not be concerned about throwing on a mask. You know what I'm saying? Like, I get the purpose and all that. I get it. And I'm like, golly, like, is that the new normal? I hate using that term, but is this the new normal?
You asking me?
You're the smart one on the here.
Man.
I mean, who else would I be asking?
I'm a doctor, not a politician. I don't know if this is the new normal. Here's the deal. I mean, you say things have changed, and you're right, but from my perspective, things have not really changed that much. What we know, what I know, and what my colleagues have known pretty much early on in the pandemic, it really hasn't changed. The mask question, just to look at that one right off the bat, the numbers, the data haven't really changed. As early as March, when I shared the article from CIDRAP, that great review article by Dr. Bourgeot, that basically said, the masks aren't going to do much. That there's nothing that's come up in the research to say that's not true. In other words, the masks probably aren't doing much of anything. But that has become the new norm, and speaking to your perspective, I went to the market today to pick up some vitamins and some melatonin, and got out of my truck and just threw on my mask without thinking about it. And it's 95 degrees and 90% humidity down here in South Texas, and I put the mask on, and within about 4 steps I was starting to gasp for air. And I realized, oh, geez, I'm not putting this on until I get to the door. It's just become reflex for so many of us now. So, we're not going to reverse the social momentum that has built up around masks for a long time. I think we're going to be seeing people wearing masks for a long time yet, and who knows when it's going to actually come around to them. The vast majority of people recognizing and agreeing that this really isn't what we need to be doing. But it's what we're doing for now. I've been working in ERs with a lot of people who have been really sick. My primary ER out in Victoria, Texas. The number that I was told is more than 20% of the emergency room and operating room staff have been infected with COVID and had to take time off. Some of them got very sick. One of the guys actually ended up in hospital and was in the step down ICU. Fortunately, he came around, so that's good. But these are all healthcare workers who are or were wearing masks. In fact, the one guy I know was wearing an OSHA approved respirator with the big mushrooms on the side of the face with the full rubber on the face seal. He still got it.
Wow.
So it's frustrating because we don't have evidence to show that it helps. Yet a lot of people are saying, yeah, we still need to go ahead and do it. So it's what we're stuck with, even though it doesn't seem to be doing much.
Well, for me, it's that fine line between it making a difference and making people feel better, right?
Yeah.
And that's frustrating to me because, man, where do you draw the line there? Where do you draw the line? I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm over it. And I think the biggest thing for me, as far as the mask goes specifically, is that I don't like being told I have to do something. I just really don't. It goes against everything that I stand for. It goes against everything that I am. Since I was a kid, I absolutely hated being told that I had to do something. And if I was told I had to do it, I had to not do it. And plus, it just doesn't make sense to me scientifically, right? How this little piece of cloth over my face is going to keep you or I safe.
Right.
But it is what it is, and that's the mandate in place. It's weird because out here in central Minnesota, out in the rural community that we live in, no one's really abiding by it anyway. I mean, and I walked into a doctor's office the other day and for an appointment, and I didn't have a mask on. And so the nurse looks at me and she says, "Oh, thank God, I don't have to wear this stupid thing." So she takes hers off. And so, but I think the fatigue is kind of it's taken root. I mean, I think people are just over it and they want to get back to life as it is. I thought, well, if we can just get to sports season, we can get to football season, we can get to to baseball. I love my Astros. I thought, boy, we can get to that. It's just weird watching it with no spectators. There's no energy, nothing.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating because all of the little tickers that I thought once we got to that everything would change. It's not. I mean, things aren't getting back to normal. So when I hear these people talk about the new normal, it scares me a little bit because I think, golly, man, is this really where we're headed? Is this really where we're going? So, but one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on, Doc, is to kind of talk about this stuff. So I want to get into this new CDC document. We want to discuss that a little bit, but. So I have a client of mine that said that she's 85 years old. She got a document. I don't know if it was mailed to her. I don't know if it was given to her by her doctor. I'm not sure, but she got a document offering her $750 to volunteer for the vaccine trial.
Right.
And I'm thinking, $750 to to be a guinea pig? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
She says, "Well, I wonder what the side effects might be." I was like, "I don't know, death."
No, it's the side effects are going to be minimal. I mean, the biggest negative outcome that's going to happen from any of the vaccines that I've seen, and I've looked at, I'm not a vaccine expert, so I've just been able to look at much of the same stuff that the rest of y'all can look at. But I did dig deep into the science of vaccines early on, read a couple of articles and used those as sources to dig a little deeper into the medical literature. So I started with, and that's really a good way to go. Start with a review article and then dig into the citations to find the articles that'll answer the questions you want, which is what I did. And vaccines are so much more complicated in the number of types of vaccines, the mechanisms they work on, whether they're biological, whether they're purely chemical, recombinants, and so forth. There's a lot of different types. Some of them are harder to make, some of them are easier to make, some of them have more chance for resistance, shall we say, and the complexity of the types and shapes and sizes of vaccines is so much. You almost need to know the science behind the vaccine before you agree to be a part of it, of the trial. But the bottom line with any of them is that they all have to go through the phase 1 trials, and before they can go to phase 2, and they're pretty much looking at phase 2 and 3 trials at this point, all of which are actually phase 3 trials, which are all going to be pretty much safe. The safety is proven. What they're looking at now is the efficacy. Are they going to actually prevent the disease? And in that case, the worst thing that's going to happen to you if you take one of these vaccine trials is that you get the disease that you're not supposed to get, and have an adverse outcome like get real sick or die.
So I'm right.
You're right.
So I was right. The worst thing that could happen would be you die.
Yeah, you're right on that. The worst thing could happen is it won't work and you'll get the COVID and you'll die. Yeah.
Okay. Die from COVID, not from the vaccine.
Not from the vaccine. No,
well,
but there is that's the safety is always it's a proportion. So yeah, I think it's possible, and not even possible, it's quite probable that there will be a few people who get an adverse reaction to any vaccine and get very sick, and maybe some of them will die. So yeah,
isn't that why they have vaccine courts? I mean, people get vaccine injuries all the time. I mean, from vaccines that have been used for decades.
Absolutely, vaccine injuries do happen, and at this point, when I'm saying they're safe, we're saying they're as safe. What's coming out now is, to the best of the knowledge of the trialers, they are as safe as any other vaccine on the market, which is to say, pretty safe, but it's not a guarantee. And some people are going to have adverse outcomes. Absolutely.
So the CDC said yesterday that they would possibly be allowing people to take the vaccine prior to phase 3 trials being over.
Yeah.
So I guess wouldn't that technically be an extension of the phase 3 trial?
That's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
If you've got 30,000-40,000 people are like, oh my gosh, I'm a school teacher, absolutely, give me some of that vaccine.
Yeah.
Or parents, wanting to ensure that their kids get a vaccine or get a COVID vaccine. I mean, that's one form of research, I suppose, right?
Oh, no question. I mean, it's looking at the history of medical testing, it's been pretty grim. We have had, if it wasn't that long ago, I mean, it was probably still being done. No, in fact, I know it was being done to men in prison in my generation who were given.
Uh-oh.
Oh man, he's really having a long
That were
think.
being tested.
Oh, I'm sorry. Come again. You froze for a second there.
All right, let me turn my camera off and then make sure. That's what I was saying, is that there were men in the 1960s and even into the early 1970s who were enrolled in clinical trials or no, medical experimentation, not clinical trials, without their knowledge or consent. Now, these were related to dark ops of CIA and so on, but there's no question that kind of stuff was done. But there were people.
I mean, weren't there black people that were injected with syphilis as a result of that? I mean,
yeah, that was some of the stuff that was happening.
Tuskegee experiment. Earlier. That was before you were.
Yeah, that was before born. My time.
Yeah,
that doesn't explain why my head isn't working. But yeah, I'm not.
I mean, it would also explain why your head's not working if it was in your time.
Right. But there's been some really grim stuff done in the name of quote unquote science by people who are pretty damn poor scientists, if you ask me. Yet, and this is the dark underbelly of that, though, is that some of the data that we know about human physiology came directly from those experiments. Some of the stuff that people learned from Joseph Mengele's experiments on human beings in concentration camps has been extremely valuable information for us to be able to do things like space exploration. That was ill-gotten information. Could it have been gotten in ways that were more ethical? Yeah, it could. For instance, and maybe this is going down too much of a rabbit trail, but the Nazis developed the hypothermia tables by taking Polish flyers, prisoners of war, and dunking them in tanks of ice water until they died or until they could revive them.
Sure.
And they did this to hundreds of them. Well, the United States Navy actually did similar experiments with their own people, but they were volunteers. They did it with willing knowledge. The classic example is the decompression tables that divers use today. Those were developed by U.S. Navy diver volunteers. So you can get very cutting edge, dangerous information in an ethical way, the way the United States Navy did it, or you can get it in a very unethical way, the way the Nazis did it. And what we're trying to do today is stay away from the unethical. And I think for the most part, we're succeeding, but there are limitations, especially when you're dealing with non-military volunteers. So that's why we have the vaccine courts, and that's why we have malpractice and class action suits for situations where people get a very adverse outcome that could have been prevented if the experimenters were more ethical.
So, I mean, so help me out here. So we are in a time that we are debating whether or not children should be allowed to go back to school.
Yeah.
College students, I know you have one, and I'm not sure if they've gone back to school or not. I think I'm assuming that they are going back to live classrooms. But it's frustrating to me, and I know you try to stay away from politics. You're not a very political guy, but how can we have a conversation in this country about keeping people safe and controlling the curve, controlling transmission, when we have things like what's going on down the street from us in Kenosha, Wisconsin, or things that are going on in Chicago, or things that are going on in Portland? I mean, when you have those types of situations and you have people in that close of quarters and the screaming and things like that, I mean, wouldn't that be a concern also?
For the kids going back to school?
No. I'm talking about just for transmissions. I mean,
Oh,
just
for transmission. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting one because, and I've got into a couple of unpleasant discussions, shall we call them, with a couple of my kids who think that I'm directly employed by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. uh, I just I hate to have to point it out that you know we get people saying things that sound a little inflammatory, but one of the memes, or kind of a theme of a meme that I've seen on social media a lot lately is, okay, so the way it works is if you go to a Black Lives Matter protest, an Antifa protest, or a Democrat Party function, you're safe from COVID and you're not going to transmit it. But if you go to a Republican or a conservative demonstration like the one in Michigan, or if you go to the motorcycle rally in Sturgis, you're jeopardizing humanity, and it's I hate to say it, but the meme theme is bearing out. We're just not seeing the same standards being applied to both kinds of group organizational gatherings. And nobody is challenging this. I think that unfortunately that a lot of my colleagues, like myself, are very hesitant to speak out on these things because we get cancer. We're at risk of being retaliated against, by cancel culture.
right.
There's one person was very quick to point out to me, hey, when I said, look, there's no question that the spread of or the sudden uptick of the cases in Texas occurred, virtually in classical time frame after the protests in San Antonio and Houston. And somebody pointed out there was an article that came out very quickly thereafter that supposedly proved that didn't happen. So I read the article and found that no, that wasn't from contact tracing. What they'd done is they looked at the cell phone tracking of the people who had been to these protests, and they didn't even prove they were at the protests. All they did was say their cell phones were in the vicinity of the protests, and then they followed those cell phones elsewhere, and they found that there wasn't spread. That's pretty, and I looked at it and I said, well, boy, that's a long way from contact trace evidence. That's a long way from any kind of convincing evidence in my experience. So I started looking for contact trace evidence papers coming out to comment on it because I expected they would be coming out pretty quickly, but they haven't appeared. I mean, it's been crickets. The contact tracing related to these events has been suppressed, not necessarily by maleficent authorities. I think it's just not been. I wonder how much of it is because my colleagues are afraid of being professionally destroyed by negative publicity.
Well, okay. So speaking of that, I don't think we've had you on the show since the doctors in
the frontline doctors.
Yeah. What is your take on that whole situation? I mean, they're all, medical doctors, right?
Yeah. But there were a couple of them who were one in particular, and I'm sure we all know who I'm referring to, has some pretty out there opinions on other things.
Okay.
And you just need one person like that in your group to really taint the whole barrel of apples. And I think but
in this current culture, if you were one of the doctors that you happen to have attended a Trump rally at some point, that's enough to discredit you at that point. So they're going to and I get it. She was out there, right? I understand that.
Yeah.
She was just the easiest one to discredit, but every last one of them would have been discredited somehow.
If she hadn't been there, somebody else would have been targeted. I mean, there
Sure.
was no question that was going to happen. You can't stand up, and it's like the two doctors in California who did that great YouTube video of what we know, and it was mostly, I mean, it was 98% accurate information, and they just got crucified in social media and in the mainstream media. They got crucified. I
Hmm.
don't know what's happened to them, but if they're still working, they should consider themselves blessed because there is so much power that these corporate medical providers have that can to end your career for no good reason. Um, Doctors are, I think, quite justifiably afraid of the retaliation.
Wow.
Uh, their licensing can be jeopardized by prescribing hydroxychloroquine in some states. I mean, just staggering draconian measures being brought against people for medical opinions that don't have a political side to them, but people have made them political. It's
So, so,
frightening. It's very frightening.
so explain to me again, and I appreciate you being willing to engage me on this level, because, and I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, but explain this to me. So, if you're my doctor and I'm concerned about possibly getting COVID, right?
Right.
Let's say I work in a nursing home, right? And I want you to um, put me on a regimen of hydrochloroquine. Are you not? I mean, even though hydrochloroquine is a safe drug, or has been considered deemed a safe drug, has been around for what, 30, 40, 50 years?
50
It-
years.
okay. Um, would you be able to do that, or would you not be able to do that as a medical doctor?
It really depends on the state. In some states, if you do that, you will be censured for doing that.
Really?
Yeah, that's being walked back. In Pennsylvania, I just read an article today that commented on the fact that Pennsylvania tried to they sort of relaxed their hydroxychloroquine prescription things, and then on a Friday, was it last Friday or the Friday before, or maybe the Friday before that? I didn't check the date of the article. It was this. I didn't check it closely. It was within last month. Anyway, uh, the state licensing and pharmacy board basically said, if you prescribe hydroxychloroquine for COVID, we're going to suspend your license.
Hmm.
And there was and they had relaxed and this is in Pennsylvania. They There was such an outcry against that from the public, not just from the medical field, but from the public, that the governor actually had to go on television on Monday and say, we're rescinding that rule. That will not be the case. We will not suspend doctors' licenses for prescribing this. That was a mistake. So there's been some absolutely insane political actions by some state governments against the medical profession over this for reasons that have nothing to do with the medicine, nothing to do with the drug. It's all political.
I mean, if there was a 45, 50% chance that this medication could work, I mean, it's already been proven to be safe.
Yeah, it is safe.
If there was a 45 to 50% chance that it would work, why would you not? I mean,
Exactly. I mean, it makes no sense. And in any other political environment than the one we live in now, that wouldn't be an issue.
but what frustrates me though, Doc, is these are people's lives,
Yes,
right?
sir.
These are people's lives. These are people's
Yes.
livelihoods
Yes.
that are being played with for political reasons. I mean, because the medication is one. We're seeing children who haven't been in school for most of 2020,
Yes.
right? Even though, to my knowledge, you can speak on this, you've done more research than I have, but to my knowledge, worldwide, there have been little to no cases of teachers contracting coronavirus from students.
No, they don't get it from the students. They get it from their other parts of their lives, if they get it. The kids aren't getting this disease in any but minuscule numbers, and they've got an extremely low level of transmission. And look, the American College of Pediatrics, or American Pediatric Society, can't remember what they were called, but they have come out and said, no, open the schools. Now, the pediatricians are the most cautious of all of our specialties. And if even the pediatricians are saying we should open the schools, you know that it's got to be safe to open the schools. These people will bend over backwards to save one kid. That's their specialty. I have tremendous respect for my pediatric colleagues for that basis, on that basis. So if they're saying open the schools, it's not going to hurt the kids to open the schools from a COVID perspective. And it is going to harm them developmentally if we don't let them get back to starting to learn in the classroom. If they're saying that, then there's really nobody who has any grounds to say otherwise. That is the authority.
Well, I was looking. Well, the goalpost continues to move on who the authority is, right? Because now the authority seems to be the political class. I was just reading an article earlier today. I'm in Wisconsin, and Dane County, Wisconsin. You might remember Dane County from your days in Wisconsin, but it is by far the most left-leaning county in it's the capital. Madison is in Dane County. They actually issued an order banning private schools from opening as well. And that came about in the last week, right before schools were beginning to open. So Catholic schools, Christian schools, Montessori schools, these types of things were disallowed to open. And it frustrates me so much because it's again, not just the children, but it's a ripple effect. You have parents who were planning to go to work, who were planning, they took their kids out of private or public schools, put them in private schools so that they could continue to get back to life as usual. And those schools were essentially being told they couldn't open. And it's just frustrating to me because when you have pediatricians that are saying yes, but then I hear the one side say, well, the right doesn't believe in science, right?
Mm-hmm.
we believe in science, but then actual scientists, actual doctors come out and they say, let the kids go back to school. You're going to cause far more damage by keeping them out of school developmentally. You're going to cause more damage that way. Then who's the authority at that point? I mean, who's the authority on the matter when pediatricians are saying open the schools, when scientists are saying open the schools, when a lot of scientists have said, well, hydrochloroquine seems to be safe. The data shows us that it is safe. I mean, are you really going to play politics with people's lives? I mean, at what point does that end?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. I do know that people are taking an extreme position on this for reasons that are not rooted in the science. They're just not. And the media isn't helping. Our national media is completely dysfunctional now. It's not telling anybody the basic truth.
And to be fair, there's extreme viewpoints on both sides, right? I know there are friends of mine who's, this isn't real. This is all just a made up a made up situation, and I don't believe that. I believe that there is an illness, right? I believe that there's a virus. Whether or not that virus came to be through natural occurrences, I'm not ready to speak on that yet, but I do not believe that it was, but that's neither here nor there. At this point, getting people back to work, getting people's lives back to a semblance of normal is the most important thing. I believe that we will figure the other stuff out and the origins out over time. Whether or
Yeah.
not that information will ever be made known to us, we'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah. Well, and as you're exactly right. The information it will eventually be known whether this was a laboratory created or a wild virus, um, eh, or kind of a combination. I have a feeling it's probably a combination, but the evidence will eventually show pretty clearly. I believe very strongly, based on a lot of stuff that I've read and talked to colleagues about. It's going to be shown that the the Wuhan lab failure was China's Chernobyl. It was a very similar kind of um, Charlie Foxtrot, where you had people who weren't up to speed handling things that were far too powerful and complex for them to handle, and they let it get out of control. And boy, howdy, look at the mess.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. It could possibly, well, I think quite probably will be a greater disaster than Chernobyl.
oh, no question. In terms of the global effect, absolutely.
And the economic effect as well. It's the story has not been finished yet, and so
No.
we will continue watching it. But at the same time, it's frustrating. I know last year, or a couple years ago, my son's school, during the flu season, it got so bad that they shut down the entire elementary school because 40% of the students in the elementary school were had the flu.
Yeah.
They were out for the flu. And that's staggering, man. It's staggering, but it was a really, really rough flu season.
Yeah.
And you see those types of numbers, and you see the reaction to it. But when we're looking at numbers with this, we're looking at with this COVID situation, the numbers just don't seem to jump out at me to warrant the measures that we are taking. And that kind of brings us to our other topic with this whole CDC story that came out.
Right.
And we talked a little bit, but very, very little. So your reaction will probably be just as shocking to me as it is to everyone else.
Okay.
So they're stating that 6%, only 6% of we get to see your face on this one. All right.
I just shut down a couple other things on my internet.
Right.
Hopefully I can stay up now.
So they're saying that only 6% of the deaths that have been reported as COVID deaths of the 100 and what was it? I think it was 100 and we crossed 6 million infections today, which I think is incredibly fraudulent. First off, let me say that I think it's incredibly fraudulent for us to continue to count cases, right? And to use those cases as a means by which to scare the American public. When you look at the cases of 6 million and you realize that, let's take it at face value, that 160,000 people have died as a result of those 6 million cases, we're still doing pretty darn good as far as helping people get through it. Okay. In my mind. But then when we are told that only 6% of those were as a result of COVID alone,
Right.
and the other 94% of the cases had comorbidity factors,
Right.
that seems like a staggering number to me, Doc. A staggering number to me. And first off, two-part question: do you believe that the CDC is being truthful about that? And number two, why is this not the greatest scandal of all time?
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked that question in two parts. Um, and this has been a hot topic since the numbers came out yesterday. I mean, my phone has, if it was on a hook, it would be ringing off it. Uh, but in the days of the iPhone, that's not it. Let me just say that I've had to recharge my phone several times, which doesn't usually happen. This is a big deal. It's a big opportunity to educate people.
Okay.
It's not a smoking gun. It's not a bombshell. It's an opportunity for people to become educated in how viral illnesses kill and how the death reporting system works. Because there's a lot of similarities, and this has been brought up before. There's a lot of similarities between SARS-CoV-2 and influenza. They're similar diseases in many, many ways, but they're different in some critical ways. But let me use flu as an example. Um, I've been practicing medicine long enough that I can remember practicing medicine in general practice back in the early '90s when we didn't have much of a vaccine program, and we had this phenomenon in our nursing home population every year that my colleagues and I, quietly referred to as the January die-off solution to the bed shortage. There'd be toward the end of the year, people would be saying, I've got to get my mom into a nursing home, but there's no beds, and we're just being destroyed by having to provide 24-hour care to mom because there's no nursing home beds. And then January would come, and we'd get the January die-off from influenza, and 5, 6, 7% of the nursing home beds would become available as these vulnerable elderly people got influenza and died. January, February, by March, the waiting lists were gone, and the old people who had needed care were in there, in a nursing home bed. And this happened every year. What we've seen happen with that since then is, with the pretty much mandatory use of flu vaccine in the elder population, we've seen that phenomenon disappear. Now, that's just one example of what's been happening in North America and Western Europe as a result of the advances in medical care. What we've been doing is we've extended the actual lifespan of the average person by a staggering 7 or 8 years in the past 30 years. So over the time frame of my medical career, the average lifespan of the average American has increased more than it did in the previous 100 years.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a phenomenal increase in lifespan. But when you look at how we're keeping those people alive long enough to be 7 or 8 years older, the cost is staggering. We are routinely providing very expensive medical care for people with marginal quality of life. And this is, we're on a slippery slope even talking about this, because there are people who are going to say, well, you're talking about mandating death panels. And no, I'm not. But this is the reality of what we're doing, what we've been doing. We've got a lot of people who are much, much sicker, but still much, much more alive than they would have been in a similar situation 30 years ago. So what we had happen with COVID is we had a new disease that we didn't have a vaccine for. We didn't have treatment protocols for. We hadn't been living with this virus for 100 years the way we had been with influenza. And so we didn't have any mechanism for keeping these vulnerable people alive the way we've been keeping these vulnerable people alive in the flu epidemics. And they have been dying off at a tremendous rate. And make no mistake about it, the comorbidities we're talking about are very, very bad comorbidities. We're talking people with multiple serious life threatening conditions. I'll give you an example. I had a case just a couple of weeks ago in one of my hospitals. I was working in the ER. a code blue up on the COVID floor. So I went up there to see this unfortunate man who had cardiac arrest, who was on the COVID floor. He had COVID. Yeah, no question. I intubated him, and we ran a pretty aggressive code on him because he was a young guy. He was only 55, if I recall correctly. And we got him back, and we were able to put him on a ventilator and move him to the ICU, where, as I understand, he died 2 days later. But here's the.
Did you guys blow out his lungs with the ventilator?
I don't think that was really a critical factor anymore. At that point, his hypoxic encephalopathy, his brain cell loss from lack of oxygen, is probably a bigger deal. But here's the medical background on this.
And I'm saying that tongue in cheek because that was a big story that came out.
I know you are.
Yeah.
So this man had here were his comorbid conditions. Even though he's only in his mid-50s, he was morbidly obese. About I would estimate, just looking at him on the bed, about 80 to 100 pounds overweight, over ideal body mass, and even high normal BMI. He had hypertension that had not been in control for a long time. He was HIV positive. He had chronic hepatitis C, and he was in the hospital not for COVID, but he was in the hospital because he had a bowel obstruction, which they took him to the OR, and of course they did. He came to the ER with a very, a lethal, potentially lethal bowel obstruction. So he came into the ER. He was COVID tested, found to be COVID positive. Went to the OR. They opened him up and found his belly was full of cancer. His bowel obstruction was because one of the metastases had blocked off his colon. So they had to operate on that. The surgeon removed the obstruction, and then closed him up again, because there's no way. This is one of those open and shut cases where the surgeon opens you, looks at how bad the cancer is spread, and just says, we're just going to close him back up. There's nothing we can do here. So that's the guy that is I won't say a textbook case, but he's a very much within the average level of comorbidities that these people who are dying from COVID fit into. This man was very, very sick. He had multiple illnesses.
So why are we shutting down the country when 94% of the people fall into either that category or into the category of the very, very old? Right?
The reason that we're shutting the country down, we meaning not you and me, but the reason that our politicians are shutting the country down is because there is a very vocal minority of activists who will jump onto their, politically harm them very hard if they make a hard decision, like to say, if they were to say, you know what, we're going to open everything up and just let the chips fall where they may. And immediately you'll have activists saying, you want to kill grandma. I've had people attack me in social media with that very thing. You want to kill my grandmother. If we do what you say, we're going to kill my grandmother. I hate you for that. And that's what the politicians are facing.
Throughout history, we've had, this isn't the first time. This isn't the first time that we have had, quarantines, right? That we've had to quarantine very sick, very ill people, right?
Well, this is different than quarantine, though, Q. This is shutting down the whole country, not shutting down.
And that's where I'm going. Where I'm going with that is that typically we quarantine the sick.
Yeah.
But we are taking people who are healthy, who are of working age, and we are forcing them to not work and forcing them to essentially to go into hiding, to keep other people from either getting sick or getting sick themselves. And so I'm just trying to have an open, honest discussion with a friend, because we're, for the first time in my lifetime, we are all dealing with the same thing. Like this story that's affecting my home state of Texas is affecting my current state of Minnesota, which is, affecting, friends in all over the country, all over the world, even. Right. And I'm just trying to make sense of this entire thing, because you being a medical doctor, I would think that, okay, where are the Ben Carsons of the world? Where's the Surgeon General? Where does he stand on this? I'm starting to become a little bit concerned about the Dr. Fauci's of the world, just because it seems as though we're getting conflicting information. Now, how much of that is political? I don't know. I have no idea. But who do we turn to for real, legitimate information? Right,
Well,
at this point.
yeah, the answer is the real answer is there is nobody we can turn to, because the process of learning about how to deal with diseases is not something. There is no single authority. There is no there's no settled science. These things evolve over time. The medical literature, the consensus of the medical profession, develops over time. And when we're talking consensus on almost anything, you're talking about, well, 60% of the doctors believe this, the doctors who have any information believe this, and 40% believe the opposite. And then if you look at that's the people who should be in the know. And then if you look at the group of doctors as a whole, it's even worse, because most of them are just relying on who their favorite authority is. They'll say, I like to read New England Journal of Medicine, and I particularly follow that one. Another guy says, no, I follow Lancet. I don't like New England Journal of Medicine. Just as a trivial example, but so you're not going to get a clear-cut answer from the people who are studying this, because the process is so convoluted and complex. It takes a long time to get enough information together to say, here's how we need to deal with it. And then really what at that point is outdated information, oftentimes, especially epidemiologically. So these guys who are coming up with answers now are going to be looking back and saying, and use the epidemiologist as a classic example. There are tremendous differences between the opinions of some of the epidemiologists and other epidemiologists. The ones who said we need to shut everything down seem to have got the ear of the politicians and the media first, and the ones who were saying no, we can't do that, didn't get any credence at all. And now we're starting to hear more from the ones who said no, that didn't work, and here's an example why. So I think by a year from now, we'll have a much better idea of how we should have dealt with it back in March. And there'll be pretty much, we'll see some consensus at that point. But we're not going to get it now. Again, getting back to the CDC's numbers.
Dr. Williams, real quick, I want to get to the numbers, but I love you, man.
Oh, come on.
Hold on. I wish that I could be as graceful as you are. I really, really do. We all knew that they were going to do everything they possibly could to destroy the Trump economy. Let's call it what it is. They said it. How many people, prominent Democrats, said, bring on the recession. Bring on a recession. If that's what it takes to get rid of Trump, bring on the recession. I told my wife back in October, they got to figure out some way to get this economy down. I mean, if people have to go to the polls with an economy booming the way it is at 3.5% unemployment, they're going to be hard pressed to get them out of there. And so what did Rahm Emanuel say? Never let a crisis go to waste. In comes this coronavirus, and everything's being shut down. So to say that they happened to get there first, they were waiting at the door. They were waiting at the door. And unfortunately, and the reason why I say that is this: anyone who was trying to be logical and reasonable was shouted down immediately. They weren't given a voice at all. So it didn't seem like we were having a great meeting of the minds. It seemed as though they were being shouted down, and you just want, well, like you said, you just want grandma to die. Well, no, I don't want grandma to die, but I also want there to be a country for my children to inherit someday, right? I want my children to inherit my business one day, and I don't want that to die as a result of it. And so I know that you aren't able to get too political, and I'm not trying to get you to be that way, but and maybe you believe 100% that it just so happens these people were there and they're the ones that got there first, and that's fine. But I think that I I'm just not able to go there. I'm not able to go there. I honestly feel that there was an agenda in being the first there and pushing, let's shut it all down and let's just let's just wait for things to pan out first. Because that doesn't seem like it's a reasonable and or logical response to the virus.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you on it one way or the other. I mean, you're persuasive. You are persuasive in that. I'll have to think about it, but I would make a point in counter to that the whole shut down society movement, for lack of a better term, quarantine the entire population approach didn't start in America. It started in Europe, where Trump is a non-entity, where Democrats are basically a non-entity. We're the American fools over there. So that's where it started. If it was capitalized upon by political forces in the United States for reasons, as you say, for trying to bring down the economy for political reasons, well, shame on them. What a horrible thing to do. What a despicable human being you'd have to be to take that kind of an attitude about something where people's lives are at stake. What a hideous, dark soul a person must have to do that kind of thing. I think that is absolutely reprehensible. And anyone who would have done that or did do that, I'm sure there's a special corner in hell that they're going to be warming up in when their time comes, because this has been a disaster. And if anyone who had anything to do with it for nefarious purposes, boy, I'm praying for them now, because they're going to need all the help they can get.
Sure. So explain to us in layman's terms what these numbers mean, because clearly what people are taking them to mean is not exactly what you take them to mean.
Right. People are taking it to mean that only 6% of the coronavirus deaths were truly coronavirus deaths. Well, that ain't true. The most people, when they die of an infectious disease, the infectious disease is like an opportunistic infection. The infectious disease, whether it's influenza or pneumonia or what have you, and I'm not talking all diseases, I'm just talking in the context of our generations. There's going to be a lot of other underlying susceptibilities in the vast majority of cases. I've seen a lot of people die from influenza over the last 30 years. They were almost all elderly, frail, sick, a lot of comorbidities. Almost every one of them. But in 1982, I nearly died from influenza. I actually had a near-death experience where I left my body and looked down on my body on the bed, and it was the sickest I've ever been, and recovering from that, which I won't go into in detail, but it was nasty. I was a healthy 29-year-old man, healthy. I mean, I ran half marathons. I ate good. There was no reason for me to die from influenza, except for whatever reason, for reasons that I don't understand. It damn near killed me. Another case that haunts me to this day is a 16-year-old girl that came into my ER a number of years ago, who looked like she just had a stomach stomach virus, gastroenteritis on Sunday. did all her labs, rehydrated her, got her feeling better, sent her home. The next morning, she came back in half dead and then died while I tried to revive her. 16-year-old student athlete, healthy, nothing wrong with her, no comorbidities. And at the autopsy, we found that she had H1N1 influenza.
Hmm.
These are, and I know those two cases, which are, I didn't die, the girl died. I know of one or two other healthy people who've died of influenza. These are the extremely rare cases. So when we talk about flu deaths, this last winter we had 80,000 flu deaths in the United States. Almost all of those people, I would venture to say probably 79,900 of them, or maybe 79,500, had significant comorbidities. But there were a few really healthy people who died from nothing but influenza, serendipity, inexplicably, who knows why, but it happened. We're looking at the same thing with these COVID deaths. Most of them are people who have multiple medical morbidities. Their health status is fragile. And that's the way it is with virtually any human death from disease. When we die from disease, it's not just one thing that kills us, it's a chain of physical events that kills us for the most part. Very few people die of one thing. As a friend pointed out to me today, he said, Doc, I hear there's multiple lines for cause of death on a death certificate. I said, yeah, actually there are. Because when I certify that somebody dies and I have to do the death certificate, the cause of death I have to put down in the state of Texas by law, and this applies to virtually every state in the United States, all the ones that I've worked in and know about. You put down the ultimate cause of death is the thing that actually killed them at the time. And then you can put down contributing factors that may have led to that to happen. And then you can put down other illnesses that may have had an effect, but were simply in the health background. So typically, I will say I'll have somebody come in that is they're doing CPR in the ambulance. They bring the guy in. We run we run the code. We get a no really decent heart rhythm on the monitor. We give them some drugs. We give them more CPR. Suddenly they're in atrial or ventricular fibrillation. Aha! I have ventricular fibrillation. That's what I'm going to put down on the death certificate. Cardiac arrhythmia was the thing that caused this man's death. And I'm not lying. The cardiac arrhythmia is the thing that eventually killed him. But what were the things that led to that cardiac arrhythmia? Well, he's got pre-existing heart disease. He's got diabetes. He's had 2 bypasses. So he's got, myocarditis. He's got congestive heart failure. He's on a bunch of drugs that are really lethal if you take them the wrong way. All of these things contribute to the fact that this man suddenly died that day. And the cause that I'm going to be putting down is cardiac arrhythmia. But cardiac arrhythmia doesn't tell the whole story. And so it is with these numbers we got from CDC. We've got people with an entire lifetime's health history rolled up into a ball, and the thing that finally made the ball stick to the wall was COVID. And so that's what they put down on the death certificate. There is a confounding factor, though, that I need to point out, and that is that hospitals are listing COVID on their statistics that they're submitting to CMS for reimbursement. And if you have a COVID death in your hospital, you get a little extra money for that. This is, in some systems, I think it's being abused. They're using it, and some hospitals, I'm sure, are quietly padding their reimbursement by saying these people had COVID when they didn't, or they're not sure.
Is that number really $40,000?
I don't know what the number is. I really don't, and okay. I don't think it's a fixed number. I think it's based on the total amount of reimbursement for that patient. So if you've got somebody who's coming in your ICU and they're there for 15 days, yeah, maybe it would turn up to be $40,000. But if you're only there for 2 days, it might only be $1,000. I don't know what the formula is. I don't work in coding, but the fact that it's there is, on the one hand, giving us an artificially inflated number or inflated idea of COVID deaths in some people's minds, but it's also probably keeping hospitals open that would otherwise have to close, because all of the other stuff that they make money on isn't coming in. And you got to understand that hospitals in this country operate on a razor thin margin. Even the not-for-profit hospitals operate, even the for-profit hospitals operate on a margin that would make an oil company blanch. You know, they're operating on 1% to 2% margins. And if you take away the elective surgeries from a hospital, you take away its lifeblood. If you bring emergency department visits down by 40% because people are afraid to go to the hospital, you reduce the hospital reimbursement by a fatal amount. So these extra monies coming into these hospitals are literally keeping America's healthcare system alive. Unfortunately, reading the numbers for people who don't understand the full picture on the other side says, whoa, they're inflating the COVID deaths. Well, maybe a little bit, but probably not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. So when we look at, anyway, getting back to the numbers that these guys gave us from CDC yesterday, 96% with multiple comorbidities. Yep, that's the way of disease. That's how people die from infectious disease. No surprise to any doctor who works with death. Maybe a surprise to doctors who don't see dead people all the time like I do, but it's just not a surprise. We know that people have multiple diseases. For me, the more staggering number is the 6%. 6%. That's a lot of people with nothing else wrong with them dying from a virus. That's a lot of people. So if anything, I'm looking at that 6% and saying, geez, this disease is worse than we thought. This disease is a really bad disease.
Okay, so we're saying that out of 6 million people, out of 6 million infected, that 10,000, for example, died strictly as a result of the virus.
Yeah, just a little under 10 grand. Yeah.
I know that I get it. I understand completely that sounds like an astronaut, but for 6 million cases, and that's 6 million that we know of. That number is, I mean, when you consider the percentage the percentage of asymptomatic cases that we believe we know of.
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably, couldn't you dang near double that number?
Well, you could. I mean, this is a lot of what people are working with. Right now on my iPad, I've got Yu Yangu's website up, which is COVID-19 projections using machine learning. What is it called? COVID-19-projections.com. He's the best modeler that we've got out there. If you use his numbers, which were his predictions have been remarkably accurate. We're probably going to creep up to, he had predicted 220,000 deaths by November 1st, with confidence intervals of, I think, somewhere like between 180 and 250,000 deaths. We're looking like we're his projections are being pretty true there, but okay. The number of people who've got sick with this disease is, boy, I'm trying to figure out how I want to make this point. You can't just look at the 9,000 COVID-only deaths as being the real number. That's not the real number. The real number is the 183,063 deaths as of today, as of August 31st, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. 183,000 deaths with COVID being in some measure a major contributing factor. Okay, that's the number that we have to look at, and that number that's also got some fudge factor in it. It might only be 160,000. It might only be 150,000. It might be 200,000. More likely, though, it's less, because the CDC's formulas for calculating these things pads the numbers, because when they look at an epidemic after the fact and they're able to go back, they're able to find a lot more cases that weren't identified during the epidemic. So they've adjusted upward in their projections based on what they know about influenza epidemics, which is the closest thing we've got to use as a basis for their projection models. So anyway, let's say we're talking about 180,000 deaths now. Now, looking at Yu Yang Gu's predictions for total cases, we're probably going to be looking at somewhere, by the time this thing winds up in probably 2 years from the time it started, we're probably going to be looking at something around 300,000 to 500,000 deaths in the United States, most of whom are going to be sick people to start with. That's the reality. Now, if you look at a nation like Sweden, and it's not a perfect example, but it is the one that everybody wants to point fingers at from one side of the argument or the other. You look at Sweden and see that they concentrated all their deaths early, and now hardly anybody is dying. By not shutting down the whole country, they did the opposite of flattening the curve. They heightened the curve, and they possibly experienced a lot more deaths than they needed to if they had shut down the country. We don't know yet. It's too early to say, but I am cautiously predicting that in 6 months or a year, when the modelers are able to go back and look at it, they will say it really didn't make any difference whether you did it the Swedish way or you did it the German way. We're really going to end up with comparable numbers either way. I think that's what's going to happen. That's the way the trends are looking from the people that I'm reading. And a lot of people aren't willing to say that. So what it comes down to realistically is to say, I quoted an epidemiologist in one of my columns several months ago, and her name is right on the tip of my tongue, but I don't have it. She's in Europe. But anyway, this doctor, she's in England, and this epidemiologist said, look, we have as a species, I just heard a person with very, very strong leftist leanings today, we as a planet need to deal with this. And my son got upset with me because my head blew off. And I said, no, the planet doesn't give a flying feck about this virus. The planet is doing just fine. It's only our species that has to deal with this. Okay. And we're just a tiny fragment of this crust of infestation of life on the surface of the planet. We have got to learn how to live with this virus, just like we've had to learn to live with all the other viruses and all the other diseases. And somehow, in our egotistical, self-centered way that seems to typify the current people populating the planet, we seem to think that anything that happens to us is more important and different than anything that's ever happened to anyone before. And it's manifestly false. We're just dealing with a different form of the same thing that human beings have been dealing with for millennia, for millions of years. It's a pandemic, it's an epidemic, it's a disease. We will either survive it, which it looks like we're going to do, or we won't, which doesn't look likely. So the thing that really seems to be bearing up, and that my opinion at this point is, we're going to be looking at a situation in a year or two where people will look back and say, it really, whatever we did, one way or another, didn't make much difference to the overall numbers. The same number of people died in countries that did this as the people who did that. The overall mortality and morbidity was about the same. It's a virus. These viruses are very hard to stop. They can't be stopped. It's happening whether we like it or not. So that's my gloomy prediction for where we're going to be in a year or two. And all of the posturing and pandering that's going on right now by people who say that Trump did it wrong, or that Tony Blair did it wrong, or whoever the current prime minister in England is, Boris, what's his name? Or I'm sorry, as a Canadian, I should know who the prime minister of England is. I don't know. You know,
Boris
it's not
Johnson.
going to matter. Yeah, Johnson. There you go. Thank you. I was going to say something. I wanted to say Yeltsin, but I know that would have really cracked you up.
Oh man. So
but I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think it's going to matter. And the people criticizing the governments for what they have done, you know, the real damage that they have done isn't in the way they responded to the epidemic. It was the way they damaged their own countries.
Right.
I think the cure has been far worse than the disease.
I would have to agree with you on that point for sure. I think we have a couple of questions that came in from some of the
Yes, we do.
the viewers. So let's go ahead.
You mean all of our listeners have not slit their wrists now?
No, they not all of them. Yeah, we still have a few of them out there. So
Maybe just one of them.
yeah. So, do you want to do the honors?
We have Anti-Venom for $2. The media spin on recent events has been nothing short of disgusting, and I can't think too much about it without getting blackpilled. This year was supposed to be a year full of nothing but funny election memes, damn it.
Well, there are some funny election memes.
I don't know how on earth. I don't know how else we were supposed to get the funny election memes.
Well, I mean, if you start to get too black-pilled, think about the fact that we have an amazing opportunity for true diversity in the White House. We are on the verge of electing our first demented president. I mean, forget black, forget white. I mean, we're about to get a president who has full-on dementia. So, I mean, that's progress, right, Doc?
Well, I don't think he will be the first. I think there's some pretty strong evidence to show that the second time we elected Reagan, he was pretty far down the Alzheimer's road too.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Up next, we have Mr. Leon for $4.99. The argument I keep hearing is prescribing hydroxychloroquine reduces the supply of other medicine, or for other medicine. That makes sense to the panel?
I think what he's trying to say is that some people have said if we prescribe hydroxychloroquine for COVID, then there won't be enough of it for the people who need it for other diseases that we know it's very effective for, and that might have some merit, but the fact is that the global ability to produce hydroxychloroquine is very high, and I don't think that it would make enough of an impact. And you know, one thing that we didn't actually touch on earlier that I wanted to just touch on briefly was I've been following hydroxychloroquine pretty carefully in the literature since this first came out, since the first paper I read, which was the French paper back in March, that first said that it worked. There's been a lot of medical research done, a lot of bad research to say that it didn't work. I mean, some just staggeringly bad research. It looks to, you know, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I'd say it looks like all the people designing these various trials designed them to fail. Recovery used an extremely high dose of hydroxychloroquine. Yeah, people got sicker on it. The Cavalcanti Brazilian trial, which showed staggering problems with cardiac arrhythmias. Yeah, he also used a lethal dose of hydroxychloroquine. So there's been some really bad research that hasn't been called out by the media and by the government people. You know, Fauci has not come out against it, for instance. But there's been enough of an uproar from the medical profession and from the medical science profession, that, you know, for instance, in June, when Recovery trial in UK said hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, there was enough of an uproar saying that you people designed it to fail that they said, okay, well, I guess we're going to allow that to continue as the Kapkov trial. And the Kapkov trial is looking specifically at using hydroxychloroquine in an outpatient setting. and as a preventive. So there's been a gradual the momentum in research has been very early. A lot of people were jumping on and saying, especially in the media and in government, were saying, yeah, well, hydroxychloroquine's been proven to not work. It's been proven to not work. I've heard so many people say that, and yet those of us who read the literature critically are looking at it and saying, well, we're not seeing that proof. And it seems that it's taking time, but the preponderance of consensus is moving away from that. The evidence, the science is going to bear it out. And I think we're going to see, again, I'm going to make a bold prediction that by late fall, we're going to see some pretty strong randomized trial evidence that shows that it does work to some degree as either a prophylactic or as an early treatment or both. But it doesn't work in hospitals very well. Most likely it may, but it most likely doesn't. So it's not a cure, but it's not a nothing burger the way so many of its opponents have said. So I don't know. That's too long an answer to the question, but yeah, the bottom line is no. There's plenty of hydroxychloroquine out there. Don't worry about keeping it from the people who really need it. They'll get it.
Up next, anti-venom again for $2. Hey, yo, F yo grandma. Her blackberry cobbler tastes like butt.
Okay.
Some mean words about my grandma's cobbler.
I don't know. I haven't had
anti-venom should
cobbler,
be really bad because my grandma was recently tested positive for COVID. So all of Walls's wonderful measures has done nothing to stop it. So
there you go.
She's pretty fine, last I heard. Just a low-grade fever. So
glad to
hear
hear it.
She'll pull through.
I hope so. I hope she does fine. There's some of these other, not off-label type treatments that have come out that people have talked about. The one that I've got a lot of hope for is down here in Texas. One of our doctors got a lot of press for that. Was the use of budesonide, which is brand name Pulmicort, an inhaled steroid, which has had a lot of positive observational study results. So there's other drugs out there that have a lot more science behind it. We know that steroids really help people from developing the lung complications. Dexamethasone in hospital makes a big difference. And maybe it is that using steroids pre-hospital is going to make a big difference. But again, there's no randomized trial on it. So you're going to get the people who don't understand how medical evidence is gathered, who insist that the only thing that matters is randomized trial. That's just level 1 or level 2 evidence. There's 6 levels of medical evidence, all of which have validity and all of which have to be taken into account. Randomized trials are not the end all and be all of medical evidence, despite what the media wants to tell you it is. That's just false.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Up next, anti-venom for $2. While you're here, Doc, if you read an autopsy and the title of an autopsy is, oh gosh, a lot of big words, cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression, what does that mean to you? Does it make a statement about the cause of death?
Yeah, it does make a statement about the cause of death. I've never seen that particular title on a death certificate or an autopsy report. The George Floyd autopsy report did not say that. But actually, no, the second one commissioned by the family said that. But the official one by the county medical examiner found that there was no significant trauma to the individual's neck and that he was not asphyxiated, that his death was not from asphyxia, was not from neck trauma. That's pretty clear from the autopsy results.
Thanks. That concludes the. Sorry,
the
I'm
question
out
and answer portion of the program.
I've had a long day.
Yes, I understand that's the case.
Wow.
Yeah, big off, Asmodeus.
Yeah. So I suppose just like anything else, you can find someone to produce an autopsy report to read just about any way that you would like it to read.
You can buy a doctor as easy as you can buy a politician.
Well, you probably buy a politician for cheaper though. So
I don't know. Some of my colleagues in the medical profession, they come pretty cheap.
um, so the question that I have for you is this: do you believe that of the, well, what is it, 180, 170,000 cases of people who have passed away as a result of COVID that did not, or that had comorbidities? Do
Okay.
you believe that, what percentage of those people in your mind would have passed away without the COVID?
Well, we don't know. We can look at the, and I haven't done this, so I can't tell you with the numbers. If you look at all cause mortality, um, it's higher with COVID. And if you look at what that number is compared to previous years, all cause mortality higher this month than it was this month a year ago. That number doesn't directly apply to COVID deaths, but it speaks to it very closely. These 180,000 deaths that we've had in the United States to date, how many of them would have died in the same time frame from something else? I'd have to say the majority of them. I would have to say, well, maybe not the majority, maybe 40%. I mean, they're gonna get sick with another respiratory virus, or they're going to stop taking their medication. They're going to have a heart attack. They're going to die from something else. But the fact that these people have accumulated, they're the low hanging fruit of the disease world. These are the weak and old and sick members of the buffalo herd that are on the edges that the lions pick off to kill. Okay, these are the ones that are going to die anyway. Maybe not this week, maybe not this year, but next year. Okay, the lion pack isn't, or the pride of lions isn't around tonight, so none of them are going to die tonight. But tomorrow night, 3 of them will.
Not to, for sake of sounding like an absolute jerk, isn't this a part of natural selection then, when you explain it that way?
Well, actually, yes. I mean, you're not sounding like a jerk, and I'm trying not to sound like a jerk, but this is biological reality. This is the failure of natural selection by medical intervention. We have prolonged the average lifespan in America by 7 or 8 years by keeping people with very severe diseases alive that would otherwise have died. And listen, most people with cancer don't die from the cancer. The thing that kills them is pneumonia or some other infection. We almost always die of an infectious disease superimposed on a comorbidity.
Sure.
And this is something I find so hard to communicate to my fellow Americans and Canadians, because the average person is so insulated from death, and yet I work in the world of death every day as an emergency physician. So I'm very comfortable around dead bodies, and around bodies that are alive that become dead. I am comfortable with that world because I've been doing it for so long. But most people have an almost phobic reaction to confrontation with death. We are very insulated from it. And I wrote an essay on this for the public defender's office in Georgia a number of years ago, and when they asked me to speak to a certain aspect of a death penalty case. And I've been an expert witness in a number of death penalty cases now, because the fact is that Americans just they walk around in a land of rainbows and unicorns where nobody ever dies. We hide from death. We hide our sick people so they don't die in front of us. 2 generations ago, grandma died in her own bed, in her own house, while the whole extended family was around for the death watch. Kids are playing in the yard. Daughters are cooking and baking in the kitchen. The men are in the living room listening to the ball game. Grandma passes away with all those people around her. Everybody knows grandma's dying. Grandma dies. Oh, she's gone. Everybody files in. There's tears. There's acknowledgement. There's a wake. Death was part of life, and people accepted it and they lived with it. In America today, we do everything possible to hide from death.
Yeah.
And we glorify it in the worst ways.
Well, I think about myself growing up, with cattle and growing up with horses and things like that. I mean, my siblings and I, we came to see death as part of life. I mean, death was just as much a part of life as birth, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we learned to put those things in perspective. I've got friends of mine who still haven't gotten over the fact that their grandmother died, 15 years ago. Like they're still rocked by that. Which, I think is incredibly sad, because I know when my daughter died, and I'm not laughing about that, but my daughter died, a guy told me, he says, I know exactly what you're going through. I know exactly what you're going through. He says, a few years ago, we had a puppy that passed away. And he says, we still haven't been able to get over that. I mean, he was 15, but he was like our kid. And I'm like, are you seriously putting your dog in the same category as my daughter? But unfortunately, that's where you have some people that take life too seriously, or take death too seriously, and then you have some people who struggle to give it the reverence that it deserves, right? So unfortunately, there's issues on both sides of the spectrum, but I agree with you 100% that that we are rocked. Our world gets rocked by death on a daily basis, but it does concern me that we are putting so much, we are legislating so much of everyday life away as a result of people who, I'm not trying to sound callous here, people who are going to die of something at some point anyway. You cannot destroy people's lives as a result. I mean, I know people who were on a great road to getting their weight down and making good life choices that have gained 50, 60 pounds because they're sitting at home and they're depressed. They are in terrible depressed states as a result of the quarantine and being out of work and those types of things. I mean, who takes those situations into perspective?
Right.
And so I don't know that we'll ever come up with the answer. The primary reason I wanted to have you on was because, there's been a lot of misinformation. There's been a lot of misunderstanding as well of this CDC information. 6%. And most people looked at that and they said, so they made up 94% of the deaths were made up. Well, no, not exactly. But I do think that the media should have been more forthcoming in explaining what that meant. Because I think that when you do explain it the way that you have, you realize that, okay, we can't say 100% without any shadow of any doubt that these people all died as a result of COVID. That COVID was you mentioned situation with, morbid obesity, heart issues, HIV, all these different things, right? Unfortunately, there was a timer on that individual's life, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds callous, but there was. But I tell you what, I know it's getting late. I don't want to keep you too long. You're always a fantastic have to be here, and I thank you for slumming it with us this evening.
We do have one more super chat.
Yeah.
You haven't seen where the slums I work in, man.
All right, let's get this super chat going.
Pneumatic Autist for $5. For the doc, have you heard whether or not it's true that 0% of people already taking HCQ have contracted COVID? Does it act as an inoculant? And for Q, Enoch stream when?
Enoch stream coming soon.
Just got to get through all the news first.
Yeah, got to get through all the news first. But Enoch stream coming soon. Go ahead, Doc.
Oh,
yeah. Hydroxychloroquine is not a 100% preventive for malaria or for COVID-19. It does. There's some, for instance, in India, the government there has mandated hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis for all healthcare workers, and they're still having healthcare workers get sick with COVID and die from COVID. So it's not 100%, but they claim that their numbers show that it's effective as a prophylactic. So I'd be real interested in getting that information out, seeing that information put out in the mainstream medical journals, but I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's out there in a different language and it just hasn't made it across the pond. But I just read today that they're using that. So no, there's no truth to that. I think hydroxychloroquine, the latest study that I have been made aware of, I read actually today, is by Bulwer. It was published in New England Journal of Medicine August 6th. And they showed post-exposure prophylaxis with hydroxychloroquine could be, their preliminary numbers, and they had a small study, it was about 870 participants, which is small for these kinds of things apparently. It could have a significant protective effect. So that's the first mainstream medical journal article to come out with anything even remotely positive about the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID. And even though we're talking about it as a prophylaxis, and I'm not sure whether they're talking about prophylaxis against hospitalization or prophylaxis against getting the disease. In other words, does it make the disease less severe? So it was a little obscure, and I had to read it in a hurry. So I'm going to go back and read it tomorrow when my eyes are a little more fresh. But I think it's interesting for the fact that we're finally seeing a mainstream article coming out and saying, yeah, hydroxychloroquine actually does work, and here's our proof of it. It may not work for everything, but it works for one thing.
Wow. All right. Hey, Soder, I think we have one from Osmodeus and also one from Antivenom. So
no,
sorry, Doc.
Person.
Okay, got it.
Antivenom for $2. I know you had to delay it this week, Q, but next week you promised.
I promised what? I'm trying to. Oh, him. Got it. I think I was supposed to have him on. So, all right, perfect. All right, I got it.
Doc?
No. I'm supposed to have
him. Right.
Yeah,
right.
Talking about the George Floyd situation. So yeah, we'll have him on. Maybe we'll have Doc back so Doc can explain to him that having a grown man sit on your neck while having another grown man sit on your chest is a recipe for really bad things to happen.
Yes, it is.
Wait, Osmodeus, we're not going to have Floyd on unless you know another Floyd. I don't know any seancers.
Yeah, no, we're not.
Really don't want to get into that. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we can discuss that in the Enoch stream. So, all right. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Always a pleasure to have Dr. Williams with us. Be sure to share this with be sure to share this with people that you know. I think it's a lot of information that could be very helpful to a lot of folks. If you are not currently subscribed to the channel, or you think that you're currently subscribed to the channel, be sure to check it before you leave out. Make sure. I know there's a lot of people who thought they were, who are not, and a lot of people used to be who are not anymore. So be sure to check that out. But share the video, share the link around. We want to make sure that this is reaching as many people as possible so that they can also be informed as well. It's a big topic. It's a huge topic right now because there's a lot of people who have been misinformed. I want to make sure that we are getting the information out to folks, and we represent the truth. That's what we want to do it out of the darkness. But Doctor, thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Soder, always fantastic with you, man. Appreciate you. I know it's been a busy week for you, so thank you so much for doing this not really last minute show, but doing this special time outside of our normal time. You guys be safe. Have a great week, and God bless. We'll look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.